After all this, you still...
I still want that gas, yes. And you had better deliver.
I have 4 empty cans of La Croix next to me.
It's not a big deal, but I totally just lost
This is my personal...
Audie and Gabby
Ryan, if I
again,
didn't know
probably
better,
'cause of
I
the-
would think you were a DNC operative.
Why? Because I took LaCroix.
Yes! Yes!
In fairness, I haven't had LaCroix in like several months. I just was at a store the other day and was like, oh,
I
there's a
haven't
box.
had it in several months. I've had to drink water.
He keeps track, Audie. He keeps track.
He keeps track. This is class privilege. This is what's going on.
Y'all goofing on me right now.
You were goofing on me. I'm having PC trouble. Okay, listen. Check your privilege.
Hey, I was mad.
Not
at
all
you.
of us have.
I was mad at Google and Torbor over there.
Torbor.
What did you call me?
You heard me, Torlor.
What the fuck?
Google and Torlor.
Okay, it's Gibby. Is Gabby's nickname. That's been
Google and
established.
Torlor is what it is now.
All right, pinheads.
Hey, listener. Welcome back to Greenhouse Gaslighting. I've got some familiar guests for today's discussion. Please welcome back Gabby.
Hello.
Congratulations on your 3rd appearance. I gotta mail you the Greenhouse Gaslighting Challenge coin at some points. Tyler.
Hello, it is a pleasure to be invited back.
I also gotta mail you that challenge coin. And coming back for his 2nd appearance, please welcome back Tyler's twin, Ryan.
Howdy. Also, how am I Tyler's twin? I believe he's my twin.
I'm not familiar with the possessive noun in this case. I thought this isn't French. What?
I can't believe I'm ahead of Ryan. That feels odd considering he got on before I did.
I mean, here's the thing: if Ryan comes on for one more, do I just mail both of you like the same challenge coin, or like?
That is rude.
It's not rude.
I will not tolerate this anti-twin sentiment. We are 2 people.
I apologize for the anti-twin sentiment on this program. On behalf of the Midwest Twin Association, I thoroughly apologize. We will be held accountable. Yeah. Anyways,
all good.
I wanted to have the 3 of you on because I was leading up to a tangent in one of the earlier episodes on being directly involved or working in the field when it comes to political goals or things that you want to do in the community. And I realized, like, well, wait, all of us have technically done some variation of working in campaigns or advocacy or working in nonprofits. And I felt like having the 3 of you on to talk about what that has been like and what you've been up to, and maybe talking about some of the limitations and what people don't know looking outside in. I feel like that'd be a useful discussion to have. So, Gabby, I wanted to start with you first because you've been working in advocacy. And I think we hear, at least on Twitter, I hear that word tossed around a lot with little to no understanding of what that means. So hopefully you can disillusion some of that for us.
Yeah, so I work in advocacy, as Audie already mentioned. So I think one of the first thing that pops into my head when it comes to talking about like what advocacy really is and what that looks like, I think like the nice word for lobbying, right? Because lobbying has this really negative connotation, and advocacy has this kind of nice community-based type of feeling to it that I think people like that instead. So I guess demystifying it, if you're going to get really technical, advocacy is informing about a topic area, usually with the goal of change, but you don't have a specified change in mind. Whereas lobbying actually constitutes as anything that you are suggesting to a elected official, representative, or otherwise. So if I say animal rights are really important because X, Y, and Z reason, that's just advocacy. I'm just informing like what makes this important, like what about it is important. Whereas lobbying would look a lot more like, hi, X, Y, and Z representative, you should vote no on this bill because it will endanger animals, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there's like a conflation of those 2 things where people say they're doing advocacy work and that it is kind of like a big umbrella term for lobbying too. But there is a specified kind of piece of lobbying is actually enacting like real tangible change. Well, it's both real tangible change, but has a specific ask. You're telling someone, an elected rep specifically, like how to do that work. Like this is what you need to do. Whereas advocacy is more of an informing type of activity. If that helps. I'm not sure how informative that is for people, but that's kind of like the nuts and bolts definition of those things. Not sure if that's exactly what we're looking at. kind
Also,
of discussing it.
There's like a big education role to it, is what you're saying. Like you're more just educating lawmakers.
Yeah, so advocacy is much more of an educational type of pursuit, which oftentimes has a spin to it for what you want, but you're not saying this is exactly what you need to do. Again, specifically to an elected rep or maybe an appointed someone in an appointed office or whatever it might be. So if you are like on Twitter and you're like, you should vote to give more money to this program, that's technically lobbying. Like especially if you like at like your representative or whatever. Whereas advocacy would just be that kind of baseline, like, hey, if you fund this, this is going to really help person B or this group of people or individuals.
Yeah. See, I really like that educating element because I think that very clearly cuts it where like 90% of social media advocacy, air quotes, I don't think it falls under advocacy then, because a lot of times it's just yelling at people like, oh, you're an awful person, or oh, you're not educated enough on this. Don't get me wrong, there could be internet advocacy. I just think it takes typically the form of like sharing information, articles, videos, even like explaining certain issues. I think the education element is really what kind of sets it apart from like people who are just ranting on Twitter, ranting on Facebook about X issue that they're passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, and you can, I guess I should be distinct too, because like advocacy is just like a tool, like it's a tool, right, in your box. It can be used for good, I get quote unquote good, or like in an effective way, or it can be used in a really ineffective way. So I think screaming at someone like you're wrong and you're really uninformed and you do these bad things, you could technically classify it as advocacy. Would I say it's particularly effective at changing people's mind or informing them about this topic? Probably not, because no one's listening to you if you're being really aggressive toward them. Whereas I think more effective advocacy, and this is just my personal opinion, has that kind of role where you're coming into the conversation saying, I want to share this knowledge with you, and I want to share why what I care about is important and how it impacts people around you.
So basically advocacy is kind of like in the middle of lobbying and organizing, where I guess lobbying is trying to really convince the legislators, if you will, or like whoever's in power at the time, like, this is why we need you to get it done. And I think that's where the stereotypes of greasing palms or backdoor meetings comes in. And advocacy is more of the trying to build the coalition. I guess maybe some advocacy involves like hard organizing. I'm not sure where that gets involved, but definitely making it a issue concern is probably the goal, right?
Yeah, it's a way of informing people around you about what this issue means, right? Because people need to know why something matters before they're going to jump onto a campaign to actually change it. Like if you don't understand why an issue area, I like whales. I'll use whales as my conduit example. If people don't understand how bad organizations like SeaWorld are for whales, right? Specifically orcas, like they're not going to get why it's important to advocate against or lobby in some cases against these organizations keeping them captive, right? They're not going to care because I haven't informed them about what even matters about this topic in the first place. They're just going to see me screaming about how we need to free the whales, and they're going to go, I mean, okay, but like why? So that advocacy, I think effective advocacy takes your message, what you want done, and it informs people about what impacts it really has. And that plays into that organizing piece, because again, you can't really organize if you haven't, I mean, you can, but oftentimes you're not going to get a lot of push behind your issue if people don't understand what the core of your issue is and why it matters to them and their communities. If you think of it like an umbrella, advocacy is a big umbrella, and lobbying and organizing too, I think, would exist under that umbrella. So technically lobbying is a form of advocacy, but it's not, lobbying and advocacy are not the same. Rather, lobbying is a subset of advocacy. So you can have all lobbying is advocacy, but not all advocacy is lobbying. So lobbying is very specific, and that's where I think you get those backdoor deal kind of things like Audie was saying, where, you know, if a company that has a lot of resources, money, time, energy is going to elected representatives and saying, vote for this bill or put this much money toward X or vote against this bill, that is lobbying. And their explanation is probably like, it's going to hurt my industry, right? Like, not a very compelling thing for a lot of people, but that is technically advocacy too. It's just feels less altruistic.
Well, yeah, and it's good that you mentioned them both as like an umbrella, because I think at least in how the general public or the deranged public that looks at political news, I guess, right? All of this kind of gets collectively, how do I put this? Grouped together as like special interests, right? Whatever that means to whoever says it. And that term sometimes gets tossed around pejoratively. But I'm not sure what term otherwise would be effective to use, because especially in the advocacy world where we don't oftentimes have the same resources that corporate lobbying has, the best you can do is to try to like gather data, gather information, do a public information push. And especially when it's harder to stay organized these days, I guess advocacy is taking up a chunk of that work.
Yeah. You know what that immediately reminds me of is people who stand on the corners, go to college, universities, etc., with like just gore and viscera as anti-abortion, like quote unquote advocates. You know, that's jumped to mind.
Well, terribly. No, I think those technically count as advocates, though.
Yeah, I mean they do. It's as I said, it's a tool that can be used in any way. I mean, a hammer is a tool. You can use it for a good purpose, like building a shelf, or you could use it to bash someone's head in. I mean, one is a comparatively better use, I think, that most people would agree with, but you can use it for something like, you know, these really graphic images we see on those college campuses, which is why I think we toss around the idea of advocacy, and it gets this really like, it is a good thing, but it has this altruistic kind of connotation to it that everybody talks about it like it's an inherent good. And it can be used for amazing and great things, but it just like lobbying isn't inherently bad, advocacy isn't necessarily inherently good, if that makes sense. It's just a tool that can be used by any individual to do whatever they find important in I guess a political realm or even just a social realm.
Right. And no, largely it's you're basically characterizing it by it being like public information is the main goal, like making it something in the public consciousness is the goal of advocacy. Yeah, basically.
Right.
And whether that's something we agree with or not, you know, I think most of us can agree that those graphic images are not exactly something we want to see, but there is a group of people who clearly feel strong enough that everybody needs to know exactly what they're showing, and so they do it, right? It's not our values, but it's somebody's.
Yeah, I mean, in your experience, Gabby, like, have you seen more right-leaning or maybe causes that, you know, the four of us would disagree with, like trying to launder their lobbying efforts or their public interest efforts by calling themselves advocates? Or is that just a little too convenient for us?
I mean, I think we see that. I haven't personally in my work because I work in a very specific field around childcare related stuff, and childcare tends to be more of I'd say a bipartisan issue. It doesn't tend to be that like polarizing, but I think when it comes to right wing, we see this is something that people can think of, like we see this with like, I mean, the NRA technically does this, right? I mean, and that's something I don't necessarily agree with, but you see them with materials all the time about statistics about actual like gun deaths or, you know, whatever there might be. I mean, I think you can, if you broaden your perspective about what advocacy means, these examples kind of jump out if you're in any way in the politics realm, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I guess like the last question I had, like before we jump to campaigns, I guess, is like, what does successful advocacy look like, regardless of the goals?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think if you take that perspective of the educating around your issue area, the ideal would be that everybody understands what it's about, they understand why it's important, and they're willing to do something about that. They're willing to call their reps, they're willing to tweet, to inform. I think, again, even if it's not done in good faith, social media campaigns that get a lot of traction are effective advocacy. Basically, once the word is out and you get a lot of people willing to share about it, talk about it, and do something about it, you've, I think, achieved your goal of being an effective advocate. on a very basic level, right? There's still like on the ground work of like, and organizing is another piece of this, but in terms of advocating, it is just getting that information. Now, if you want to parson out the lobbying piece, the success would be, something like if you're asking for money for a cause, getting that money actually put through in a budget would be effective lobbying, which is again a form of advocacy. But really, that information and knowledge is really the big piece, in my opinion.
See, that's where I think a lot of advocacy, and I guess like I'm talking about the things that the average person can do, kind of falls short. Is I feel like a lot of people are willing to like they educate other people, they say that they support a topic, or they say that they're an advocate for X belief. But then there's always that follow through, right? Or like I think maybe lack thereof. Kind of what you see sometimes is that people are down to. I immediately think back to the black squares on Instagram. People who are like, hey, I'm an advocate for this. I'm trying to spread this around and educate people on this. So I'm just going to share this square, and then I'm not actually going to like donate or like call my reps or like do anything to like follow up on it. It's kind of like performative activism in a way.
Yeah, well, and there's also a person when I think of this, it's also part of like sustained attention to an issue, right? It's great if you get that one push of like, this is important and you get a lot of people to talk about it off the bat, but really that doesn't amount to anything if you're not continuing the push and you're not continuing the interest in that topic area. So in terms of the black squares, you have all these people who quote unquote advocate, which I mean, technically, if they're sharing resources and information, they are bringing attention to the issue. But without that sustained effort, they're not making actual real change or keeping it in public consciousness enough to actually enact any difference in the community or their government or whatever it might be.
So hear me out. See, what you're saying is advocacy, if you advocate, for example, on social media and start normalizing discussing a topic.
Here we go again.
And here we go. Well, that's what I'm saying though, is if you and your advocacy machine on social media make it normal for people to post about a thing and educate people about a thing, that's kind of accomplishing your goal of advocating for
and it's not that I want to rehash that discussion, but I guess it's good that you brought it up again that way. And this is something that it's not like any smoke directed at you, and this is just like something that I wanted to bring up in the discussion, is that how much of all of this is limited by the current norms of what we deem acceptable political engagement, right? And I guess the question is like, is advocacy limited by being in the quote unquote marketplace of ideas, right? Because in what Ryan's saying about normalizing, I think that maybe the way I look at it less is that it's not that an opinion gets normalized. It's more like more demand seems to be created. And I guess a successful advocacy effort would be like changing opinions in opinion polls. Like that to me seems like the effective goal, right? So do you think that advocacy today is really limited by being in the modern marketplace of ideas and limits of what's considered acceptable? Or do you think that advocacy has the potential as of now to like actually change people's hearts and minds?
I mean, I think it's a sticky thing because when you get into like, and I don't know if this is exactly the realm we're looking at talking about, but when you get into the normalization or socially acceptable realm and people are doing these things in order to quote unquote like be like more socially acceptable, or that's what you need to do to look a certain way, I think at that point you're not seeing people participating in movements, and this is a personal opinion, but I don't think you're seeing people participate in movements because they care as much about the issue, but more so because they know they need to be on the bandwagon because this is what is socially acceptable and this is what is socially expected at the time. So I think in that space, if we're using this really basic definition of advocacy of informing about a topic area, and then that informing, hypothetically or potentially and ideally would move into movement on an issue area, I think you see a lot of people who, if you're doing it because you want to be socially accepted and because it's normal and not because of the issue at hand necessarily, you've created something where people aren't actually learning properly about the issue. if that makes sense, because the goal would be to learn about the issue, to think about it, and then to become a champion of that issue to inform others. And if you're just doing it because, oh, I didn't post a black square, people are going to assume negative things about me, that's not really coming from a place of actually wanting to advance social justice or racial justice, or a place where you're trying to advance or actually change a system that is clearly broken. I think that maybe touches on what you're thinking of, but I'm not sure. I got off track. I'm sorry.
No, I think that was a useful digression.
I think more to kind of Adi's point about like market and demand and whatnot. I think when it comes to spreading information for positive causes, and this will apply to everything. This will apply to newspapers. This will apply to mailers. This will apply to social media, like what have you. There's always going to be those people, like, how do I put it? QAnon started on social media. Like how much custom tweaking exactly what information you get from what people, and like blocking out anybody who's advocating for something that you don't agree with, and like, you know what I mean? Like there is an ineffective, or I guess a limit to what advocacy can do, because the way that social media is, and like I said, this isn't just a social media issue. Like people will just not subscribe to certain newspapers. They'll just not watch certain news channels, as we all know. Fox News, I think we all avoid that. They'll go out of their way to like kind of just completely cut off these quote advocacy channels. So I think that's kind of where you hit a limit with like a lot of the non face-to-face forms of advocating and educating on the topic. And that does kind of ultimately impacted by, back to Adi's point, impacted by what people want to see, like what's in demand, what people are looking for right now.
I think to riff off what you were just saying, I agree with you 100% that face to face is just different. Like I worked on however many campaigns. You're going door to door and talking to people one on one. That's the most effective strategy. To a point where some campaigns have just decided not to call people at all. Essentially. But to kind of get, I guess, like the topic overall, absolutely, it has a lot of potential to make advocacy very strong, because I would argue that social media has forwarded a lot of social causes. Like the amount of like safe spaces for like LGBT folks on like apps like TikTok and stuff that exist is amazing, and there's a lot of education about it, and you find like, youth and young people who may not necessarily know much about like their identities and stuff, learning stuff in those communities. So like advocacy there, absolutely amazing. Tyler got it before though, QAnon, yeah, stuff like that, bad stuff spreads too. And overarching, whether or not you agree with the cause, disagree with the cause, these are still private companies. Like social media is able to take down certain videos because they think they're, the most, like, I guess, blatant example of this, or not blatant, but one of the bigger examples we've seen in recent times, Donald Trump, even if he runs in 2024, is not allowed on many social media platforms. Well, and that's going to actively affect the campaign. So you see these companies taking decisions and making decisions based on what they think their consumers want. And so, yeah, you do have some advocacy that is essentially limited because the companies don't want you to talk about it. So it's just something to keep in mind with that stuff.
Yeah, and I didn't want us to get back into the social media discussion, although I guess it gets tied.
It just keeps pulling us back.
It keeps pulling us back. It never ends.
Never no getting away.
Well, I can go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say, I did have a quick segue just to say that Tyler talking and Ryan a little bit too brought up. I've also participated in things that are not social media advocacy. Actually, most of the work I do is not social media advocacy. And there is something it's been different because of COVID, because we can't go to the state capitol. Usually they literally will go to the state capitol, have meetings, like we bring people that are impacted by the programs to talk about them. And from what I know, those are kind of, there's like an energy to those events, right? Rallies and things like that have like a life to them that really pushes people to do something, and it puts a face to these issues. One of the things we really focused on in like advocacy is storytelling when it comes to people in our field, because stories go a lot further than just data and facts or aggressive kind of points. And then what you do, you tell the story and then you follow up with numbers and information and like what you want them to do after the fact, like an elected rep or anything like that. We did do and this is interesting away from social media, but we did do events that were centered around virtual events, so Zoom calls, things like that, in terms of rallies and those kind of issues. And even those were neat because we got a lot of representation from people that usually wouldn't be able to show up at a Capitol building. And they had their own kind of spin to participatory information, like participation and energizing. And we had a lot of really cool feedback about people who we got to hear from, again, like people who typically don't get heard from, because this is increased some access. There's also access barriers in other ways, but just kind of getting away from social media, other campaigns for advocacy events are very effective and have a kind of a life to them that you can't ignore in favor of social media.
Mm-hmm. See, I think that's a really cool idea. Like having like people be able to video call in. See, here's the thing about like the internet is that we've talked to death the number of issues with using social media as some kind of organization thing, but let's just back up from social media and just think the internet as a whole. I mean, the ability for people to be able to get access to representatives, as long as it's in an environment that's conducive to that, like a Zoom call set up by an advocacy organization, is that's a super cool idea. Because I know a lot of younger people, like Gen Z, even like younger millennials, we don't like talking to people. That's such a weird way to word it. It's like that meme, like people hate answering the phone.
I was about to say, we certainly don't answer our phones, so you're nuts if you think I'm answering my phone.
Right, and like people just willingly come onto the internet of their own volition. They like self-choose to divulge that information via posting. So in that sense, it is useful to collect information, and like with advocacy, the goal being to get the word out. It's effective for that, and then you can really pull the numbers on like how this is doing, because if your goal is to get the issue to the forefront, it's perfect for that kind of thing, especially with how quickly the information can disseminate. But
right. You get your issue trending, you're winning.
Right, but it's like, I guess once it trends, what comes next? That's the tricky part for me.
That is a very good, excellent point you bring up.
And that's really why like I get jittery about the whole social media thing, or like how people discuss politics. I guess, aside from me being a crank, I guess it just always goes back to okay, so now that this issue is at the forefront of the public consciousness, aside from posting, what comes next?
Right, because we do see some issues which unfortunately haven't gotten as far as we want them to. That did kind of start off as like hashtag slogans.
Mm-hmm.
A few come to mind, but yeah. So getting yourself on the trending page, shoving yourself into the forefront of the social medias is one thing. Then how do you then take it and turn it into action? Help with stuff and like actually turn like big social media posts into like meeting with legislators and like having. I mean, Gabby, you can talk about your own job, obviously, but that's why I like Gabby's job so much, because it's just such a cool thing. It's like taking that and turning it into a powerful thing. So.
I think that's what's missing from a lot of social media, I guess. I'm just keep going into social media. Why the fuck not? What's missing from a lot of different social media pushes is that follow-up of reach out to an organization. Reach out to, insert X advocacy group that has then set up a Zoom meeting with your representatives, that has then set up, a day where people are going to hand out flyers or something. Like, I think that's really the follow through, Adi, I guess, in your opinion, or to address your point, is like, that's the point of getting your thing trending, is so that you have like hopefully a volunteer train that comes in off of that. Now, whether or not that actually happens,
I mean that's what organizing is at the end of the day, right? Is like, okay, whether it's the volunteer train, whether it's like we get workers to unionize, whether it's getting people out in the streets, that's the crux of what organizing is. It's like, okay, let's get people to do something. But go ahead.
Well, it's funny. I guess I can kind of speak from personal experience a little bit with let's get out and do something. Because just funny enough, I have a Twitter, and on Twitter, I ended up meeting some people who identify as anarchists, and they talk about a lot of like direct action. Like I end up hearing a lot about like stuff going on in Las Vegas or in these other cities, like direct action, like helping your fellow protester or helping, stuff like that, right? And honestly, that direct action thing is kind of what inspired me to launch my sock drive last year. So it's, that was, I guess that's a case of like something from social media, like motivating me directly to actually like take action and organize a thing where I've gotten like, 1,500, soon to be 1,600 pairs of socks donated to different charities, things like that. So, I mean, I guess, I don't know, that's like a little personal anecdote.
Well, speak to us about your experience then with your nonprofit, because advocacy is one thing where like if we're concerned about an issue, we can try to bring it to the forefront. And then you directly went and started your own nonprofit. So talk to us about that.
What finally pushed me to actually, do something instead of just laying around the house all day. And I guess for me, I, looked around and saw this problem of, people in the Midwest, it gets, cold in the winter and people's, I mean, not to be gross, people's toes fall off because it's cold. It's a serious problem and it happens to people every year. And I was tired of seeing that. So I said, well, what if I use my own personal networks and I use social media to try to gather socks up best I can, especially because there's not, I saw a need as well because there isn't any, I mean, there are other clothing drives, don't get me wrong, but nothing specific for socks. And socks tend to get forgotten about because they're kind of considered, I don't want to say they're considered undergarments, but like, they're considered something that people don't think of. You think, oh, I need winter clothes. You think coat, you think hat, you think gloves. People don't really tend to think about socks. So I saw a hole, a need, and if I could just gather as many socks as possible and then give it to the organizations that can then get it to the people that need it, people who are, struggling with housing or people who just in general can't afford pairs of socks. I thought that would it would fill a hole.
The overall strategy was really like, because what I'm trying to get at is you saw the need in the community. You saw where like the resources were not being properly distributed. So it's cool what you did. And like, I want to be able to plug the project towards the end, but I guess I'm like from a mechanical process of like, how did you get the organization up and then how did you collect the socks? Do you want to share that for the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, funny enough, social media was a big part of it. Specifically, I guess, so I'm someone who, I've been involved in a lot of community organizations. I tend to have kind of a large network on social media. I'm not trying to brag. It's just, I know a lot of people from a lot of different areas. So
he knows them, folks. He knows the people.
Well, I do. And so putting the word out there saying, hey, this is something I'm doing because I want to solve this problem. I want to do this thing. I want to help with X thing. I use social media to get the word out, and I was really touched and surprised by how enthusiastically people, jumped on. Like I said, one family who are funny enough friends with my grandparents. I'm not going to name names, but who I, had not talked to much directly in maybe 15 years. And all of a sudden, they're sending me 72 pairs of socks in the mail. One of my grandparents' neighbors showed up to their house while I was there with this bag of like 300 pairs of socks that they had gathered from their neighbors and their friends at their church. And I was just so awestruck at like,
so literally word of mouth was able to like pull the resources.
Yeah, I would argue it was more word of mouth because it's not exactly like I drew a whole bunch of new people in using social media. It really was just me activating my own network of people and my friends around me and, them supporting me in this thing I was doing. So, yeah, I guess, yeah, it does kind of fall in more word of mouth, just word of mouth through social media, if that makes sense.
I think that kind of shows how we can all leverage our own networks to enact some kind of change, right? Because most things happen after a few people get together and they decide it's worth something. And this kind of ties back to advocacy, because when you become a really strong, solid champion for one thing and you talk about it so often, the people in your network are people who care about you or know you are going to usually feel at least somewhat compelled to try to help you with that goal. Like maybe socks don't speak directly to these people, but they do speak to Ryan, and so people are going to go who care about him and think he's a good person. Like, I could help. I could pitch in and help Ryan out. And I think we vastly underestimate how strong our network can be and how how that can further out. So if Ryan gets himself, who's really passionate about his project, and maybe he gets 4 or 5 friends who are super passionate about his project, and they tell their networks, and they're like huge champions and they talk about it all the time, it also increases the likelihood that people that know them are going to become involved. Like it really is a spillover effect. It's you got to get care for a sustained amount of time about a specific thing. And I think people will get on board. It's this kind of poppy advocacy where people just kind of throw something out there into the void and then they don't really follow up on it, which I don't think is highly effective.
Trying to get the viral tweet, as it were. No, I agree with you 100%. And I guess that's one thing I'd say to anybody who's listening. You would be surprised how many people want to help you with stuff. Like, if you want to make the world a better place, you'd be shocked how many people want to help you. So,
well, and people did come out and help you, and like I'm trying to coax you to say, like, so what was the final count, and like how many people do you think were able to be helped by that?
Oh, you know what's funny is I should have these metrics memorized. I do know that there were 1,236. So our first sock drive was focused around October, November. So we ran it over Halloween stuff, just before it starts getting really cold up here in Michigan. And that was about over 1,250 pairs of socks. Since then, I've had the fortune of having random high schoolers reaching out to me being like, hey, we're collecting socks. Can you help get them to, in fact, no joke, I actually haven't told anybody about this yet. One of my old teachers from high school reached out to me and said, hey, this club gathered 100 pairs of socks. Can I meet you somewhere by your house to give you these socks? And I'm like, absolutely. Yeah, just this that just happens through, I guess, get so many Facebook messages now. So it's like, you'd be shocked how much people want to help
you. It's awesome. One thing, just having followed your project the way that I have, is I think kind of getting back to what we discussed earlier with the following up on like encouraging people to actually like do something in response to your advocacy. I think you had a pretty good, and again, I don't know if you know these metrics and whatnot, but I think you had a pretty good turnaround of people who saw what you were doing and then said, oh, I'm actually going to do something now about that.
Yeah, no, I do. Well, and the metric I really should have memorized is how many individual donors did I have. But, it was a lot. It was at least, for 1,200 pairs of socks, it was at least around over 150 individual donors throughout this time. Now, granted, some of those donors gathered socks from their friends, so I really have no idea how many individual people, but it just shows how, you'll never really know how many people you're reaching, and you'll never really know how many people you're affecting when you do effective advocacy, building networks, building a mechanism to do good. You really don't know your full impact. You probably never will, but It's a lot bigger than you think it is.
I think that also speaks to some things. I know you had talked to me a little bit when you were getting this stuff started, and I guess one of my big things when it comes to advocacy or trying to get people in on what you're doing is I genuinely feel like most people like to help others. I mean, it feels like a very general statement and can sometimes be undermined by things we see happening around the world, but I genuinely think that people do want to help. And if you give them an easy way to do it, they're more likely to do that too. Because there's also, we get busy, we get distracted. So if you give someone an easy way, something simple like socks, like go to Amazon, go to this other, Target, whatever website you're gonna have it. There's a wish list there. Buy the socks, send them directly to me. I'll deliver them. Right? That's a very quick, kind of easy thing for somebody to do. And the more you remove those barriers, the more likely you're going to have more auxiliary people helping out. I mean, it's the same thing again with kind of more formalized advocacy, where if you tell people, go call your representatives, they're much less likely to call their reps compared to if you give them a script and you say, this day at this time, call your rep. Here's a list of your rep. Here's how you find your representative. Here's who they are. Here's their Twitter handle. Here's whatever. Here's some sample tweets. You just have to copy and paste them. Just put your rep in there. People are far more likely because we're busy and we're distracted and it's hard to stay active in these kind of spaces. So you really got to remove those barriers to be an effective organizer, I guess, is kind of moving into that realm of this conversation.
Yep. My brain immediately jumps to those text messages where it's like, respond back with this number to let your representative know that such and such and such and such. I get so many of those.
Well, I mean, the text messages are okay. I think the worst ones are fundraising emails, low key, because I don't know which Democratic group it does it, but they're the ones where it's like, John Ossoff is about to lose. We're losing bad in Georgia, but if you donate now, we might be able to turn this around. Like,
that's financial fear mongering, is what that
that's
is.
what that is. Ryan, I did have one more question about your effort, because it's pretty cool that you had
Absolutely.
this project based on mutual aid that you were able to apply directly in the community. One thing that came to memory, and I wanted to ask you about this, is what, in terms of, how you were able to set this project up, it seems to me like at least you didn't have too many institutional hurdles to face.
True.
Because I'm remembering a story, I forget where this happened, and I hope you guys remember, but it happened, I want to say Missouri or Maryland somewhere. There was some kind of community food drive, and they were serving meals to the homeless. I forget when. It was before the pandemic for sure. Yeah, you've heard about that. Okay, yeah. And
it's happened in a few cities.
Yeah, and the police would like seize the food and prevent it from being given out or taken by people who were trying to just eat. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's been a few instances of that. I can't think of any like that jump to my head, but I've definitely seen that throughout the years growing up. I remember seeing people talking about that, how they'll prevent you from helping people.
Yeah, do you think that you were in any position where someone would try to prevent you from doing that project for the community, or do you think that because you had local partners and because it involved some degree of e-commerce during the pandemic, no one really, was opposed to that? Yeah, not to sound conspiratorial, but
No, I was very blessed. I will always say I think the biggest hurdle that I jumped was my own intelligence, and just not knowing how to do a lot of the stuff, learning how to use certain forms of technology for the first time, and all that. That was my biggest hurdle. But so institutionally, we partnered with. My organization just gathered the socks. We then gave them to reputable, well-known nonprofits in Southeast Michigan that then actually dispersed them to the different groups we were supporting, whether that be, like I said, people who struggle with homelessness, housing issues, young children, groups like that. So we gave them two groups because, quite frankly, I don't want to be the one who's handing out socks. I like handing out socks to people. But I think it's more valuable if other people already have well-established networks and lifelines and direct links to these people. I'll just use their hard work and just help them as much as I can. So thankfully, I didn't have any huge hurdles. Thinking back if there was anything, thankfully I haven't had any huge hurdles.
I think honestly, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that you are. I mean, sure, there are people who rip on homeless people, but I don't think there's anyone out there that's really going to be bent out of shape because someone's giving people socks. Now, if you were running a nonprofit that, let's just say hypothetically, operated in a state like Georgia that wanted to make sure that people were given water while they're waiting in line to vote, then suddenly it becomes institutional hurdles and systemically putting things in your way to stop you from being able to do your thing. So
yeah, because I also wanted to have a bit of a discussion on institutional hurdles to advocacy and organizing, but we can get into that I think after we have the conversation on campaigning, because I think myself, Ryan, and Tyler have had some experiences. We have some horror stories from 2016 as well.
Boy, do we!
Even before that,
even before then, yeah. And I
2014, I have stories from.
Yeah, I've got one bad one from 2015.
Yeah, I guess it's good I learned how to use the bleep tool before I edit this, because I'm gonna have to at least bleep out a couple of these things. But
I promise I will be on my best linguistic behavior.
Yeah, and I don't want to also give the impression that getting involved in the system is inherently fruitless. I just wanted to have an honest look at what works, what isn't working, and what's going on so far. But we should talk about campaigning, I guess, because as most liberals tend to conceive of their politics, or particularly how we talk about politics in America, it largely is posting and voting that seems to make up the bulk of political engagement or lack thereof. So if you can work on a campaign, that's probably the closest a look the average person has, aside from, being a party apparatchik.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things looking at just generalized advocacy versus campaigning is that campaigning has a very measurable metric as to whether or not
Votes,
you were
yeah.
successful. Either your candidate wins or your candidate doesn't, or you hope it's close if you do lose. So I think the thing, I guess, talking about what works and what doesn't, just from my experience, and I've had like a chance to be a part of everything from state campaigns to like federal campaigns. I even had limited experience with presidential campaigns. I think what was always the most effective is just knock on somebody's door. Like I feel like campaigns nowadays have kind of decided to go away from the traditional door knocking method where they send out volunteers to knock on people's doors, which for anybody listening is not illegal. Despite what anybody tells you, it is not illegal for a campaign to send people door to door. It is a protected version of free speech. And I think it's silly that.
Oh my God, the amount of times I've gotten the cops called on me, man.
Yeah. Well, and I know many people who've had the police called on them because people got it in their head that their no soliciting sign means that campaigners can't knock on their door, but that is not the case. I cannot knock on your door randomly to sell you something, but I can knock on your door to inform you that government is important and the people who run your government are important, etc. And I think that's honestly where I have personally seen some of the most positive results is when you get out there and you connect with someone on a human basis. Because there's always like the social media ads, there's always like the big events, the big speeches, and I'm sure they factor into the metric somewhat. I'm not going to say that those efforts are completely pointless. You do have to stay relevant ultimately. But I really think my mind immediately jumps to that story about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, where she talks about, specifically where they have her shoes from all of her door knocking when she was up against Joe Crowley back in 2018, because that was the most valuable thing, at least for her campaign, and she ended up winning because of it. And I think it's because they prioritize that door-to-door human connection. So if you were to ask me what I think is the most effective when someone's running for office, I think it would be the knocking door to doors. I don't know how that translates to things like nonprofits, but I know.
I was going to ask because I see two main intersections where advocacy and campaigning tie. And I think it's when the candidate has to draw on an endorsement from an advocacy group, right? So whether it's seeking the endorsement or whether it's like trying to go to that group to try to create a constituency, that's where that intersection comes in, at least in liberals. Well, actually, either liberal or conservative spheres. If you're a Democrat and you're trying to get the League of Conservation voters on your side, you're going to at least campaign to some extent on what they want. You know what I mean?
Oh, well, yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right, exactly. No, I think it's funny with door knocking too, Tyler. I know you're making the point that that's like, and it is. It's absolutely. I agree with you. The most effective way to forward an issue, to get a candidate, get candidate support. But there are barriers to that too, because even though somebody has a no soliciting sign, it's technically legal to knock on their door. Chances are they'll probably tell you to piss off because they don't want to be bothered. And I've been chased off by many different kinds of guard animals, including a guard chicken, which actually like came at me aggressively. That was a whole thing. So there are barriers. Like, it's very hard for some people to just go up to a door that they don't know, knock on it. Like, there's a certain level of courage that needs to be there. And I'm just,
I agree. And I'm saying this as someone who's tried to work in field ops for campaigns before, is I'm just really not good at cold calling, cold texting, or knocking on someone's door and trying to like persuade them. And something that I'm curious about, and I just wasn't able to find an answer before this episode, is when did liberal constituency groups and campaigns begin relying on door knocking as a main thing? And something that I wanted to get your guys' takes on is it's a Midwestern thing, you guys is I think there's something to be said for the lack of participation in civic groups or social clubs or even like advocacy groups and unions, right? Where I think, even if you didn't open your door for a campaigner, if you probably were a factory worker and your union was having a meeting and whatever candidate came through to the union meeting to talk to the guys, would that still be a way for you to engage the candidate? Because I think town halls, because of the potential for being directly confronted by voters, is an effective way for the candidate to, not only deliver a message, but to like really get a sense of who they're up against and vice versa. That has diminished. And I think there was, at least a couple of years ago, there was this report about how like no candidates or representatives even attend their town halls. If someone does show up, it's like 5 people. And
that is very true.
Yeah, and I think that campaigners are kind of relying on door knocking and canvassing and phone calling like it's a fact of life. And maybe I'm not denying that it's part of a campaign's lifeblood. You want to get people who wouldn't find out otherwise. But the lack of civic participation may be a critical factor in this.
I mean, reverse. We touched on this earlier a little bit, but I think the advancing in technology, and as much as COVID has completely sucked ass, to put it lightly, it has pushed everybody into this sphere of being more comfortable with telecommuting and doing things like that and running events and things like town halls in a virtual format, or at least being accommodating to that. So I feel like if candidates tried to take advantage of that, it might, as we mentioned before, it might remove a barrier to people attending these kind of things or participating in them. I'm not saying it's like fixing the problem. I think there's a lot of work otherwise to do on it, but it could be one way to get people engaged with it without, having
Absolutely.
too big of an ask for people to come. And I think it's an opportunity that's really salient right now and needs to be taken advantage of before it's kind of gone.
See, I think, okay, call me crazy. I had this idea years ago that just popped in my head. Why don't more elected officials / candidates that want to become elected officials, why don't they just do straight up Q&A live streams? Like, I understand that
like
live
get on
streams
Twitch.
can be...
No, they
yeah,
do.
like get on Twitch.
Yeah, like AOC does TikTok lives. Like a lot of canceled TikTok lives.
Well,
and then
I feel like AOC has a certain culture war dimension to her live streams, right? But I guess like when Bernie did the call-in show on Tom Hartman's show and stuff like that, I think there's always been forums, but I've just never been able to understand the degree of participation.
Well, yeah, and it's hard to, I guess, one thing that is somewhat tricky about relying on the internet as kind of your way that you're pushing. And I think one way that this kind of demonstrates itself is through the fact that a lot of socialist candidates, leftist candidates, have taken to the completely publicly funded campaign model, where they use something like Act Blue to collect small donations from individuals across the country. And, you'll end up with these situations where someone has an incredibly high amount of individual donors, and their internet presence is decently developed. But then when it comes to like people in their district, like who actually are going to get a chance to vote yes or no on this candidate, it's an unfortunately low amount where you end up with these leftists ultimately losing. I think the reason that door knocking, and again, with my limited experience, why I think it is one of the most effective ways to reach out, is because at bare minimum, you're guaranteeing that you're reaching people who are actually going to get to vote for you at some point. And don't get me wrong, I have always said, if I ever become like a U.S. senator, if I ever become, any kind of elected official, I want to do live streams like on the reg. Like I want to do them. I want to be out there. I want to use the internet as a way to continually communicate what I'm doing, what I want to do. But I think ultimately more targeted things like the well, the cold calling, the door knocking, again, the hard stuff. I'm not going to deny how difficult it is for a person to do. That's the way that you actually make sure that you're reaching out to a voter who's going to get a chance to decide your fate ultimately.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, Tyler. And I think it's super important because you hear a lot of people talk about elected reps who are not from the area, especially House reps, right? AOC is a big one, I think, and they don't like what they're doing or they're frustrated with them. And every time I hear that, my first thought, and this, might not be the nicest thing in the world, but my first thought is like, why should they care? Well, you're not in their district, right? If this person is wildly leftist or whatever it might be, the only reps that I think you need to really be pushing against in terms of not your district would be people in leadership positions, right? So the majority leaders and the like. But honestly, I think that connection with your actual community is super important. And you made me think of something, but leveraging community organizations. So the first one popping into my head is like a community church, right? Because that can be a really strong center for the people who are in that community or space, especially like rural areas. If you go there and you speak directly to the people where they're congregating, whether it's a church or it could be any other, any other spaces, but recognizing where the lifeblood, essentially, the gathering spaces of your community are is really, really important. Because if you're just kind of talking out without being aware of what that is, it makes you feel disconnected from that space and that community. Like you don't really know where people go. You don't really know what's important to them. And I think it's important to keep that in mind.
Well, and I think if you are lucky enough to be a candidate that represents a district, I think this is the kind of the category that AOC falls into, where if you represent a district where a sizable amount of that district is technologically literate, is able, like understands how to get onto these live stream services, or heck is even like a part of organizations that already use online meetings as a sort of like gathering place or meeting space, then you very easily, like a candidate can tap into that. And I think I don't know how to explain it. It would be nice if the internet evolved in such a way where we were able to, on a more consistent basis as people, meet up in an online setting where a candidate could kind of just slip in. Because that's a big thing. Candidates can get your emails, they can email you, they can get your phone number, they can get your address and door knock you. They can't force you into like a casual conversation where they're actually like able to talk to you through the internet. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of what's missing with internet organizing, is that there's no way that you could just be on your laptop and you get a random phone call from such and such candidate, and then boom, suddenly you're in their live stream where you're kind of in this town hall format where they're answering questions. Like there's no compulsory way to do that. So drawing people in, especially like young people or even older people, because older people still vote, drawing them in is another big hurdle where it's like it's nice to try to engage people that way, but like I don't know, it's just tricky with the internet. I kind of got off on a tangent there, but
no, I think it was a okay digression. I think for what it's worth, the actual civic town hall as an institution might need to be brought back, because
I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, because I think that
it's bringing back town halls.
Yeah, but even then, like outside of just candidate town halls and elected official town halls, the amount of public forums to discuss issues, not even political issues, right, is extremely limited. We're facing an epidemic of loneliness, especially lately. Involvement in social groups, unions is down, stuff like that. And I think something that characterizes older generations versus where we are today is that degree of community participation. Because even if you didn't have the advocacy to, work behind a candidate, they would have to chase you guys down at the bars, at the union halls, at the churches. You know what I mean? And you've met with these people a bunch of times, so at least the community connection is there to an extent. And I think to the degree that we try to bring back some degree of progressive or left-wing political change, it's also important to try and give people back a degree of humanity.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. I think, not to cut you off, but I think, and a lot of that has to do with just how our society has changed. I mean, our grandparents knew all their neighbors.
Right.
Name a single one of your neighbors. No one in our generation knows their neighbors. And so it's one of those, yeah, you're 100% right. I don't know. There are probably other people who know far more about this topic than I do, in terms of like what has caused the change for us to be so isolated. One of us, people are just listing. I'm sure right now our listeners are just like listing how many neighbors they know in their
Yeah,
right
if
now.
you do know your neighbors, shout out to you.
I know all 3 of the older women who live in my apartment complex with me, and they are very friendly.
Props to you.
No, that's
they gave
fair.
me a plant for Christmas.
But like, and that's so powerful though, because like you hear about Bangladeshi Americans who all live in the same apartment complex banding together to basically unionize against their landlord who treats them like shit.
Yeah, that was tenant organizing. Yeah.
That's tenant organizing. Like that's what's missing from a lot of, I hate to say it, a lot of millennials. And it's what's missing from a lot of libs, and it's what's missing from a lot of Zoomers, is that you need to be comfortable with like approaching strangers and being like, hey, we're both human. You should care about this issue. Let's go do it together.
Right.
I don't mean
sorry, go ahead. I'll follow up later.
Well, I think a big part of that is the fact that millennials move so often. I mean, so my brother and I, we're twins. I believe between us, we've lived in like 12 to 13 like different homes.
I have lived in 14 homes before.
Yeah, permanence of community has not been a concept for me. I've lived in India. I've lived here. I think within the past 3 years, I went from being a college student to living in New Orleans, working a corporate job, to moving back in with my parents and then moving in with my girlfriend, right?
So is that just a symptom
at 2 places? Well, I think that, I've spoken a lot about precarity, and I think that, at what point historically precarity came as magnified as it did, maybe that's also the push on where campaigning got worse. But whether it's, how we fight against precarity or how we fight against isolation, like my message to my fellow internet leftists, and especially to myself as one of those people, I'm not perfect. And I do believe that, let ye who has no sin cast the first stone. So I'm casting it back at myself. Is the whole point of the Marxist tradition, the whole idea of class solidarity, is that we would compare notes. And that's why he spoke on the conditions of French peasants and the working class of England, is because these people were so socially intertwined that he saw this as the condition in which class consciousness would arise, is all these people comparing notes of, damn, our labor conditions are shit. Damn, the boss also treats you like shit. Damn, we feel disposable. Let's do something about it. That,
right,
for whether intentionally or unintentionally, that sense of social cohesion is rapidly eroding. And it makes even the acceptable strategies that we've talked about so far, of advocacy, of nonprofits, of campaigning and voting, it makes it incredibly tough. So for everyone who's talking about when the revolution happens, or lack thereof, we're still not at the point where we can build effective machines to keep candidates winning. You know what I mean?
It's like, bruh, Gen Z.
Well, I understand the frustration.
I feel like I can comment on Gen Z and millennials. We won't even talk to each other, let alone organize a flippin' revolution. It's like, fam, you got to be able to answer a phone call and make your own doctor's appointments before you're able to start.
We're not to like make those boomer jokes come true, but that is a literal loss that we've been feeling, is people are increasingly infantilized and living more and more precariously, and are more and more alienated, literally from their free time and from one another. So that has to be critically overcome.
Yeah, I want to say something too. I don't want to put us on social media again, so this is like trying not to do that, but it almost begs the question though of how much do you need to know the people around you when you can connect with people who are a lot like you almost immediately on social media, right? Like, I think that has to be part of it too. And again, don't want to harp on it too much, but like, do you need to know your neighbors who may or may not be people that accept you for who you are or have similar viewpoints than you, if you could just do that by picking up your phone, right? So I think there's also that kind of piece that gets in the way.
Yeah, Gabby, we will never escape social media because, fun fact, we're on a podcast. We are social media.
And that's my nightmare. That is my nightmare once I realized it, is that a podcast is nothing more than a long post.
Well, just a random.
The social media has been in the house the whole time.
Oh gosh.
Oh my
Okay,
Lord.
I'll let you ask my question, and then I did promise Twitter some campaign horror stories.
Okay, and I'm down to give them. One last thing I guess I want to say is I think this is where we get to the point where not necessarily organizations that are affiliated with like a political party, so not necessarily like the Young Democrats of America or anything, but like you've got organizations like the DSA, which I'm not sure if you've talked about the fact that you're a member on the podcast audio.
I think I said that in episode 6.
Okay, well, I recently became a member as well.
Hey.
I have a monthly subscription. I think this is where organizations like that are really going to have to start filling in that gap, because they're going to be the ones stepping in to say, like, okay, you've engaged with leftists on social media, you care enough to be a part of the DSA. So now, talk to your neighbors about socialism, like talk to you or take what you've done. It's, again, kind of tying back to advocacy. Take what we're talking about here and then put some action behind it. Because that's ultimately how we're going to reconnect and like be able to really get back together to discuss political topics and kind of re-engage people. But go ahead, Ryan.
Hello, sir. Can I borrow a cup of sugar? I don't know. Are you a union member? Are you paying your dues?
Oh, my Lord. But yeah, so to me, organizations like the DSA, they kind of in a way are going to become the sock drive, but for politics. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I see them.
How do we make the world a better place? It's going to be through stuff like that.
Right, and a lot of people look at the DSA very cynically, especially these days, and for what it's worth, I didn't expect the DSA to bring the revolution today. I think what it really has the potential to be is the first forum for actual people to engage one another, and because it's a loosely based collection of chapters in practice, different chapters are able to conduct different projects, and they take different approaches because they're somewhat decentralized in their approach, at least in my experience so far. But at least with the mutual aid and the issue advocacy and at least the little electoral work that they do in trying to get their endorsed candidates out, it's something. It's something harkening back to that tradition. And if you take issue with how the DSA has conducted itself lately, it's okay to criticize, but if you remain a poster, morality aside, you're just going to continue to be miserable.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a whole, and maybe this could even be a podcast topic because I've noticed a lot of it happening, where you've got these groups that, they're pushing leftist politics. They care about leftist issues. And then they'll maybe do one or two things, and then suddenly the whole leftist movement wants to like cancel them and like make them. And that's the thing is anymore.
Like there is no left. I think, not to quote Matt Christman again, but we're still in a pre-left phase. We're all not. I mean, again, people want to talk about anarchist versus communist beef. Neither of you are in a position of power right now. So why are you just at each other's throats on the internet? Do you get what I'm saying here? And
yeah. Oh, I totally get what you're.
And there's definitely things to be said, but for what I've seen of it is it sporadically rose after 2016. People's energies were all over the place. They're still all over the place because we're alienated, because there's the lack of information. Organization has been stunted for so long, right? That you will see some idiocy at times, and you might see that some of the members that got elected might not be performing up to what we expected. And that's reasonable to be upset about it. But I think it's just worth expressing for your own relief that this happened in 26. This happened like 5 years ago. There's still a lot to be done. And it's okay to be upset about it. But I know that the change is very urgently needed. But because we're human beings, it's going to take some time.
Speaking of 2016,
yes, let's talk about those horror stories. I finally let's deliver on what we promised.
All right, who wants to go first?
I mean, Ryan already started with being chased by chickens.
I ain't going first.
All right, I'll go with 20. So, I guess, do you guys want to hear about a local race or do you want to hear about presidential race?
Local.
Let's start local, yeah.
Local. Okay, so back in 2015, 2014. Oh goodness, whatever. An even year because they were electing. It was a state house candidate. God bless him. Really nice guy. Unfortunately, he didn't win. I'm not gonna, name names or anything. But he actually ended up being the first state race that I ever had a chance to work on. And it was like the second or third time I had ever door knocked. I am taken over to this neighborhood. And I was told that it would be a really easy neighborhood because this is his neighborhood. It's the neighborhood the gentleman lived in. And apparently he knew a bunch of people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But
correct me if I'm wrong. Had he not already been elected to office in that local area? So it should have been easy, right?
Yes, he was a representative for the village that he lived in as well. So a name that people should know. But ultimately, his name didn't end up mattering here because what happened was I get given this house, and the way for those who haven't campaigned before, you got an app on your phone. It maps out the house, spits you out an address, and then you just go knock it and you rate it with how well it went. I'm walking up to the door, and to be honest, it's kind of a cool looking house. The guy's got some interesting Halloween decorations up still. It was November at that point. But it looked like the kind of house that at least is somebody who's a little more, I guess, free thinking, if that makes sense. So I'm kind of confident. Little teenage Tyler is more confident with how it's going to go. So I knock on the door. The guy opens it. It's an old white man with a mullet. I just explain that I'm there on behalf of one of his neighbors. I go with the little script and he says, I'm not interested. And then, he shuts the door, which is like, okay, that's par for the course. Turn around, walking back, meet back up with the gentleman who's knocking the neighborhood with me. We just so happened that we ended up stopping to talk in front of this house that I had knocked. So the gentleman with the mullet, opens up his door, steps out onto his porch, and he yells at the two of us. He says, hey, you two. I turn over. I see that he is in his boxers. He has decided to come out to the front yard in his underwear. In his hand, he is waving around a book. And
was he wearing boxer briefs or straight up like Lucy's?
Boxer briefs.
Oh, dear Lord.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it was something. And well, the guy that I was, the gentleman that I was knocking with, God bless him, didn't know the experience that I had at the door. He didn't know that the guy had shut the door on me. So he goes into campaign mode, walks toward the gentleman, to talk to him about the candidate. And I almost said, I was like, oh, I'll just say that his name is Nick. I was like, oh, Nick, no. But he goes up to the guy and he's like, hey, I'm here to talk about X candidate. The guy with the mullet in his underwear, who's now halfway across his own yard, by the way, where all of his neighbors can see him in his own underwear, pulls out this book and he shoves it in the other campaigner's face. And he sees, do you see this definition of solicitation? And he starts yelling the dictionary definition of solicitation at the top of his lungs, pointing to his no solicitor sign. For a moment there, my guy tries explaining that, that's not soliciting what you're doing for your candidate. Meanwhile, I'm standing 30 feet back, the guy, just panicked out of my mind. I was like, is he about to swing at the other guy I'm knocking with? Am I about to have to break up a fight? But no, luckily, Mullet Man backed down. Well, he didn't really back down. Just the guy I was talking with ended up turning around saying, "Have a good day, have a good day." The guy screaming about soliciting as we're walking away, saying, "Have a good day." Turn around, this guy literally walked. We were down the street at this point, but he walked out to the middle of his road shouting about soliciting in his underwear in his own neighborhood.
Yeah, the lack of self-reflexivity is surprising to me. That like, okay, he's upset that you guys came by his door, and honestly, he could have closed the door. But like, in your underwear, bro, really?
This is why you need to know your neighbors, so you can have the appropriate amount of shame when you walk out into your yard with only
There you
underwear.
go.
Man. Also, I would warn my neighbors, like, yeah, don't go knock at that guy's door. He's fucking crazy.
I have an equally weird one like that that I can pitch in. I've got a couple that I wanted to share, but I didn't have too many like
More Adventures of Nick Redshirt.
I didn't have too many people who like I would approach and they were mean to me. Most people would just, say I'm not interested and like leave it at that. And that's fine. I wasn't exactly an effective canvasser either, but for what it's worth, like I prefer interactions where it's like, no, thank you. And it's like, okay, I didn't go anywhere, but at least, no one was mean. But I think the worst one I had was we were doing canvassing like outside the library where I was campaigning for like a local representative.
Yes, I think I remember this.
Yes. And I was with another canvasser. I'll just say that they were the typical,
it's Nick Redshirt. Nick Redshirt's the other canvasser.
It's not Nick Redshirt. No. This is someone else. But I'll just say that they're ostensibly like the typical college liberal who like will give you a lecture on why something's racist, but like not have the gravitas or like common sense to like not delve into a college answer on the street. So the guy who we were about to canvass looked like Bill Clinton. I swear to fucking God, this man looked like Bill Clinton in like a leather jacket and like dad jeans. And I'm like, yeah, he might be a solid Democrat. So I'll canvass him. Reach out to him. I hand him the brochure, and the candidate I was working for was Asian. And this guy goes straight up into it. This man turned from like Irish white to red in like 0 to 60, and was just like, well, why would I vote for him? He wasn't born here. It just went straight into it and then continued to walk on with his day. Kind of embarrassed that he went on an outburst, but like wasn't going to admit that he felt bad about that. And then the person I was with just goes straight into like Elizabeth Warren shenanigans of like, excuse me, sir, you can't say that. That's racist and you need to be aware of your white privilege. And she like runs after him to like give him the Robin DiAngelo talk. And I was just like so embarrassed. I was so embarrassed, and I was glad I was reaching the top of my shift.
That guy never did it again, though. I bet that guy's scared of any fucking canvassers he comes out because he doesn't want to deal with that bullshit.
But I don't know what was worse, like me like not following that up, or like the person who went to scold him. Like I feel.
No, that's totally fair. I think, yeah, I don't know. I think that guy. I guess if I was a racist guy who was a little flustered because I accidentally let my racism out. If some fucking college-age person chased after me in my car to like scold me about being racist, I would never be racist.
But I don't think the scolding helped him change his mind either.
Oh, he wouldn't change his mind, but he'd be a lot more fucking careful if he'd say that around me.
I guess, but like it's good at like shaming people, right? But like we were never gonna get that guy to begin with, and like the whole scolding thing, I think just turned people off to us being there anyways.
Well, if he didn't happen to be the shameful one, and he happened to be a little bit like a lot like Tyler's guy in his boxers, there's like a serious people can do some kind of whack shit. So
yeah,
like there's like a risk there, right? Like you go chasing after the guy who just yelled something racist. Like I don't.
Yeah, there's a level of like background insanity in America, and I just feel like you shouldn't chase it either. You know what I mean?
I can't believe you watched a college student chase after Bill Clinton to his car. What the fuck?
Oh my God. I think Adi, correct me if I'm wrong. I think I also had an opportunity to it was the day of the election working for that same candidate that you're referencing, where I was at my own personal voting location. And I did because, the candidate put his face on his literature, as most candidates do. I did have a woman who I later found out that she was actually a candidate for the local school board. She comes up to me like because she sees I'm handing out stuff, and I hand her a card, showing the candidate, and she says, "Oh, is he from here?" And I was like, "Oh, like he lives in this community. He's a local pastor at that community, or like just like little like he's part of this community." And then she's like, "Oh, but is he from here?" And I was like, "Well, he lives in this city and he lives in whatever." Like I ended up forcing her to ask it like 3 times before I finally said I believe he immigrated here from insert Asian country. But it is that was I knew that she was gonna be like shitty about it the moment that she asked the first time, but it was kind of nice like forcing her to have to repeat it, and I just keep giving more and more reasons why this person is an integral member of the community, regardless of their skin color and their nationality.
It just
yeah,
seems like the
she
dumbest
won.
reason to oppose someone is just like, but were they born here? And I'm like, I mean, the eligibility requirements dictate that, right? And you're still trying to cancel them like on election day. Okay, good luck with that.
I have a bizarre, like, I wouldn't even like a horror story, but just a straight up bizarre story from that same campaign. Fun fact: all 3 of us worked on the same Asian person's campaign, and I was at a local community college by myself, tabling for the candidate, and I was again totally by myself. I'm a fucking like 20-year-old kid sitting there, and one of the people she worked there, she was a janitor, I think. Not custodian. You get what I'm saying. And she just had questions, and like she was genuinely curious about the candidate. Didn't discount him first off for being like a non-white candidate. Didn't like, but she really wanted me to understand that Germans had it really bad in World War II too. And she really wanted me to know.
Oh my lord!
She really wanted me to know. A lot of Germans were forced out of the Sudetenland. I was like, "Fucking what?" What is?
I guess she really wanted to be like an epic, like alt-right person to you, but like couldn't do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, she just had a lot of opinions on why Germans got the shit under the stick. And
she wanted to do the Ben Shapinas thing. She wanted to do it so bad, but like,
man, he is running in 2016, not 1945. I don't know what you want me to say.
Yeah,
There's nothing he could do about that.
I love when people, like, not love, I say love like it's highly amusing when you talk to people and they're just like, they're living somewhere else. Like you're having one conversation and they are not hearing a damn thing you're saying. They're having a completely different conversation with you. Like to me,
man,
like that is a specific, yeah, like this is a specific brand of like just wild shit of like we're not even speaking the same language right now. I don't know how this happened, but it's happening.
And what sucked is she hung out at my table for an hour, so everyone else felt really awkward coming by the table even. And so she literally like fucking, she like cock blocked me basically. Like there were other college kids who were like interested in knowing.
But I bet that just
crazy
like
janitor, I'm pretty sure she was on the clock too. Like she was just spending her shift trapping this poor boy at a desk. It was just bizarre.
It just sounds like liberal campaigner gets owned, like type shit, and that's what they thought they were doing. And also like just I've noticed like when you get confronted by a right winger while you're out doing field ops, so to speak, they have a different like they've already had an argument with you that you were not present for because it happened in their mind palace. And I think I had one where like someone just really wanted to like turn me into an anarcho-capitalist, and I'm like, yeah, this guy has child porn at the house. I'm leaving. I'm not fucking dealing with this. Like, because like the database they give you sometimes has good info, sometimes it doesn't, and it says, oh, strong Democrat. Let me go knock the door. I don't know if it really was the guy on the registry or not, but you go in and you're like, hey, I'm knocking candidates. I see that you're a strong Democrat, and I just wanted to, and they just go in on like, well, what if markets controlled everything? And I'm like, nope, not here for this one. Bye-bye.
I think it's always the most interesting when you are working for somebody in a political campaign and you have that person that you started the conversation because you're trying to educate them about your candidate, and they decide that they're going to try to make you a Republican. Like in that moment,
Yeah, in
they're gonna
that
try to
moment, you
convince
as
you who's there, I have signed my soul to campaign for this Democrat for at least a day.
for at
You're
least
somehow
$10 an
going to be the
hour if we're
one that
lucky.
convinces me. Bro, y'all got paid? I'm just kidding.
I have a funny story about that. Yeah.
But yeah, like it's just so interesting in a million settings. I mean, whether you're running the college Democrats at your local university or if you're working on a political campaign, those people who just want to try to change your opinion completely are just, I don't know how to explain it. Like, I think there's some of the oddest people in the world.
Okay. I got a couple other horror stories, I think mainly pertaining to working with other campaign staffers. I've got mainly, I'm not sure what it is about the Democratic Party that attracts these kind of very almost toxically goal driven kind of people. I'm not going to name names, but just really obsessed with like wanting to be in the Democratic Party war room at some point. And they're like, well, if I get good results on this campaign, it'll set me up for the next gig, set me up for the next gig, set me up for the next gig. And I can either be a candidate or like paid consultant in the future. And you just deal with a lot of people. And I think it was really exacerbated in 2016 because there were really the two main camps, which was like, if you were a Bernie person in 2016, you just wanted to like show up and do something good. And you were a little more concerned about pay because like this probably was taking away from a more paying job or was supplementing your income in some way. And then there were the people who like could afford to do this because they could write this off as their internship in class and shit. And they would make it up to like higher positions in the campaign and shit. And the way they treat on the ground staffers, it's Amazon level sometimes. Like they love shaming people for not showing up to things or not like getting enough numbers. Like I was just being shamed of like, what could you be doing right now that's possibly more important? You know what I mean? Or
Damn,
timing.
The timing is cosmic.
I can build on that. Okay, I'm not gonna say the campaign. I'm not gonna say anything. I would have been part of campaign environments where literally they went through each person and you would be just verbally berated if you didn't hit your numbers for like volunteers you brought in that week, phone calls made, yada, yada bullshit. Literally scolded in front of your coworkers. And there would be like 40 of us in a room. And they would literally go around the room, point to each person and be like, what are your numbers? What are your numbers? I remember one time I did so well on my numbers that he thought I was fucking like lying or that I did something wrong. And I was like, what the fuck? Like,
ended up follow up. So are you two referring to the same person?
We are likely referring.
I will beep out the name. Yes, I'm talking about.
Okay, cool. Just to a note that Adi made early in the podcast, I think what's important to say about the situation is that just to not discourage people from getting involved in political campaigns, we are talking about like the same individual. Like this isn't something that like
this
from
is
our
like
knowledge is systemic for working for.
And also we were part of the Democratic party at the time. Like for what it's worth, if you've been to a DSA meeting or if you've been to like an outside advocacy group, they tend to really appreciate the fact that you're taking time out of your day to do it.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, small groups will love you so much. I mean, it's the same with not dragging in like a whole bunch, but like, different animal shelters. Like you volunteer with like a small group that's trying to make the world a better place, like an animal shelter or like a sock drive. You will just floor them and they will be so happy to have you. So don't be discouraged because we're talking about random instances with people that were systemic problems. So please get out there. Please help.
Yeah, exactly. Well, my other big horror story of working with a campaign was the one time I ever ended up being involved with a presidential campaign.
Are we talking about when we got gaslit into working for the Hillary campaign?
Yeah, is that a
Yeah.
big enough? Am I allowed to say Hillary Clinton? Like, is that
No,
a big enough
let's
campaign that
honestly
it's like,
say it.
come on?
sure
I'm not
that's
going to talk
probably-
about any
Okay.
specific organizers,
yeah.
and to be honest, we're really over time. But I think we have a lot of content to work with,
Okay.
so I'm going to have a
So-
field day editing this. So go ahead.
I'll try to keep this. I'll try to keep this point succinct. So, at the time, for context, I am the president of the College Democrats at my university. So I am, quote unquote, the head Democrat at my university, right? So of course, and this was after Hillary Clinton had been confirmed as the nominee. We get the Clinton campaign sent an organizer to our university, and they basically attempted to become my best friend, where like they had my phone number. They were kind of constantly talking to me back and forth. Yeah, it was quite. I was a young little excited young man. It was quite the experience, just getting all this attention. To me, it was like, oh, this guy's working for a presidential campaign. Oh, that's crazy. Well, so randomly one day, he shoots me a text message, and he says, "Hey, how would you guys like to have insert big actress here, who just as a disclaimer, none of this situation has to do with the actress. I'm sure they are a lovely human being. They had no idea that this is how anything went down. So I like them. I see them in movies now, and I can't help but think of this story. But again, I digress. How would you like to have them come and speak and campaign for Hillary at your university?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's a huge deal. Like, that would be awesome." So I tell him that, right? Not 40 minutes later, I'm sitting in the main student center of our university just working on homework. I get this like all caps email from the head of these student organizations, who's an employee who works for the university, says, "Why are you telling everyone that this actress is coming to the school in like 3 days?" And I'm like, "What? Like, I didn't say anything. Like, what?" So I run downstairs.
And the timing
to
of
go
this was
talk with
horrible. I
her.
just want to give some context. Like Tyler was going through like some personal shit at the time, and we
Yeah.
were also involved like with this Democratic org, right?
Yes.
And you just
I
tell
worked for
us
that
like
terrible
offhand,
campaign.
like this is the shit you're dealing with, and I'm like, what?
Yes. So anyway, they basically bring me over to a computer, and they show me that the Democratic Party, like of America and of Michigan, they're all posting about this event with this actress coming to the university. And she looks at me, like it says hosted by the College Democrats at this university. And so the person who runs the student orgs looks at me and says, "What are you doing? Like, there's so much, like, we don't have a
Oh my
space
God,
ready, we don't have
they had a
parking ready,
conniption.
we don't have anything ready to like host this event that like hundreds of people are going to come to. Like, you have to let the university know." And then I just poured my guts out. I was a panicking like 19-year-old kid who was like, no, I promise it's not my fault. I didn't know that they were immediately going to take this. Like, I literally showed her the text messages. I was like, this is all I knew. So she says, "You have their info. Bring them in here. Bring them in here right now. Bring the campaign person." So I'm like, okay. And I tell the campaign person, who happens to be getting signatures or something in another part of the school. He comes walking in like nothing's wrong. Cue
Yeah,
2
this
hours.
motherfucker is causing a campus-wide meltdown, and he is just hanging out in like the fucking.
Oh, and
student
it was
center
the
gathering
biggest
pictures.
asshole they sent because
Oh my God!
because like
Yeah.
they
This
they
bastard.
literally said like this fucking twink. I can say it. I'm
From,
queer.
like,
They send this
California.
fucking twink from LA out here, and like he's over here like getting mad at us because we were a little chapter of Bernie Bros, just trying to like
There were,
do
like,
something
7
nice.
of us in
There
the
were 7 of
club.
us at best. It was hard to get students involved in this university, and he's over here like, "You guys aren't getting numbers for Hillary. Why aren't?" And like I had like projects due at that time, and he's like, "Well, why aren't you canvassing?" I won't. I was like, "I can't. I'm fucking busy right now." And the worst part was like they were trying to promise us like campaign and administration jobs for doing it, and I'm like, "How stupid do you think I am? I'm gonna go work at the White House because like I got to get some signatures for Hillary at my podunk like school? Really?"
Yeah, exactly.
Just sell
Well,
your
so-
whole soul. It's fine.
what ended up happening? So cue a 2-hour meeting with the university's administration. Where ultimately, and I gotta give, I had my disagreements with this university employee. over the years that I was there. But she quite literally moved mountains. I mean, she cleared out a whole like venue for the speech to take place. She cleared out parking. She rearranged stuff with the campus police. I mean, she really did do a lot to make this happen because and I feel like this was the most her and I ever bonded because I think she really understood that this wasn't my doing, and she was just trying to make it work. So she goes to this guy who works for the Clinton campaign and says, okay, like, we've got it set up. We've waived the fee for the venue. We've waived all these different fees. All that is left is like I think it was a $200 fee for something to register the event. And the club that I was running couldn't pay for it because we were, a university organization. And he then extends the meeting by another half hour trying to see if like that we could just not pay that fee. Like that $200 fee became like the turning point, to the point where he then said, okay, the event's just not happening, and then left. 2.5 hours of my life. The event did not happen over a $200 fee. She then had to go and recall all of the university people that she did and said, I guess it's done, put back in whatever event we bumped. Yeah, and I think the real kicker to the story, I think what really just ices the cake, is that this gentleman then went on to quit the Clinton campaign, and then he voted libertarian that year.
Fucking A.
And like advocated for people to vote libertarian.
Holy fucking shit.
And
I didn't know that libertarian.
Yeah.
And it's not just exclusive to what happened to our little college chapter, right? That year I talked to like people who worked on different campaigns. I mean, Ryan was working on that legislative race we were talking about. And these Democratic races that were doing well in the summer before the presidential primary had been decided now had Hillary Clinton tied to the name, and it started like putting them under the bus. And to top it off, the orders from campaign ops were explicit. You are now supposed to like canvass for Hillary and your candidate.
Yep.
If you do, and like, go ahead.
The candidate I worked for, because I worked with this candidate who was running for Congress from February, for my fucking birthday, my 20th birthday, until November. So I was there the whole time. Okay, I was there before. I think there were 3 people who were there longer than I was. We lost. We got closer than any other Democrat candidate from unseating a sitting Republican. We lost because of Hillary Clinton. It was 100% her fault. We did everything right. We did everything you're supposed to. We knocked hundreds of doors. I'm pretty sure the Republican we were against thought he was going to lose. Like, he released a video the day of voting where he was like pale. He was tired. He was like, yeah, guys, just remember to get out and vote today. Like, he thought he was going to fucking lose. But we lost because Hillary Clinton was on the top of the ticket. That is 100% what happened. I will go to my grave saying, I remember that night when we figured out the results. Like, people were like, yeah, she tied a noose around our neck and dragged us to the ocean floor. Like, that's what happened.
And it's not just the reputation race. Like, the way that the state party and even like the federal party was like using other campaigns' resources to like print shit for Hillary. Because I don't know if you guys remember, but like there was no Midwest strategy for Hillary. They just actively assumed that like, well, we're going to win it.
Yep.
And effectively speaking, everyone at the state committee level who was like, because I heard that there was like a freak out in the Michigan campaign to some extent, and they just like forced all these local races to like pool the resources for Hillary, or at least that's what I've heard. And it screwed everyone over in the process.
Hillary might not win. Yeah, exactly. All of a sudden, polls were saying, hey, Hillary might lose Michigan because she didn't fucking show up here.
Didn't show up, no campaign apparatus, couldn't even get a yard sign, but goddamn, Russia was definitely involved in that. Russia was definitely like, don't show up in southeastern Michigan. Don't need to get there.
Out of my mouth.
This whole podcast is going to turn into a let's shit on Hillary Clinton thing, and there are other campaigns that traumatized me just as much, so we should.
But I think 2016 has been the formative event. You know what I mean?
It is, absolutely.
Because I think 2016 was the event that like really opened my eyes to like, okay, this liberal brand, this this nebulous term progressive, this adherence to like pussyfooting around whether capitalism is something to defend or not, this idea of respectability being the only vector by which you can express things, it's not fruitful. it's not effective to like getting the word out, especially when we've talked so heavily today about like how alienated everyone is, how precarious everyone is, how people don't want to be involved in the shit. And if you make it this kind of thing where it's like, well, you have to tie yourself to this candidate, and not supporting them is, you know, failing to adhere to the proper standard of respectability, you doom the entire project. So I don't want this to turn into like a joint venting session for the three of us.
Yeah, I was about to say like a joint therapy session into it.
Look, I said it before. Men will literally start a podcast before going to therapy. But
absolutely,
I'm really curious, actually, seeing that we do have Gabby here, and Gabby, you do have a perspective of as someone who has not volunteered for a political campaign before. What are the things that I guess kind of hold you back? Is it because you're busy, or is it like these kind of stories, or like not wanting to work with these kind of things? Or I'm just curious.
It's a lot. I think my personality wise, I just don't. So I'm like Adi, do not particularly like the idea of knocking doors. You said you didn't like the idea of knocking doors, but it's just not really your strength. And I feel that. Fun fact, for my undergrad university, worked for the calling for donations sector of the university, and it was awful, and I hated every minute of it. So I just know that that's not really where I'm most effective. It's not really where my strength is. Or at least it's not what I like to do. I also just, in general, I'm currently getting my MPA, so Master's of Public Administration, and people tend to ask me like, oh, so you want to like be an elected representative? And that sounds so unappealing to me because I also am not a very competitive, like I'm just not a competitive person. I like to be more collaborative. I don't like adversarial environments that much. And so the elected rep realm is pretty much all of that. So I just don't, none of it speaks to me. And so I figure like, if I'm going to make change, I'm going to do it in a space where I feel like I'm most effective. And that maybe can be a message too to people, is that like, this kind of work isn't cut out for everyone, right? And I also don't think, to you guys' point about the Hillary campaign or the Clinton campaign, I don't think if you're drafting people who don't feel strongly about the candidate you are pushing for, you're probably not going to be highly effective. I think it takes a certain type of person to be really good at it. I think it takes a certain type of skill set. And if you don't want to do that, there are other ways to be involved and to help your community and to push for issues you think are important that doesn't involve like interacting with a man waving a dictionary in your face.
Hey.
You know, and that's not just that. I think it's amazing work that you guys have done, because I know I don't want to do it, right? It takes all sorts to make movements and changes, and so it's just personally not. As much as I talk about doing advocacy work too, I'm a lot more like a data and numbers person. That's kind of where I usually feel the most comfortable.
Which is super important, should be said.
Yeah,
the people who crunch the numbers, incredibly important part of that.
Yeah, and so I think everybody should be in a space where they are using their strengths, they're comfortable to make the best change. If you kind of try to fit a square block or a round peg in a square hole or whatever, it doesn't work, I don't think. So that's a little bit of my personal reasoning behind not being involved in it in that respect. But, you know.
I agree, because I think people need to leverage what they actually can bring to the table, as opposed to like what the organizer explicitly says is what they want. And again, like there's no shame in like not being a better canvasser. If you want to become a better canvasser, that's your responsibility, but it will work out for you because that's what you organically want, and you can actually like do the job better. But if all you can do is like work in advocacy, or like, let's say if you can work on a campaign where there's more opportunities to engage differently, you could join the comms team, or like the marketing or what have you, or even the social media team. Like campaign social media was the one thing at least I was able to do. As much as I talk shit about it, right?
As much as you bitch.
As much as I talk shit about it, again, it keeps coming back to it, right? But
right.
I think that this is where the solidarity and nurturing other people's talents really remains critical. And it's not just, what we need numbers for. It's also what we need effective work done in all arenas done. That's how I look at this. So if you can't canvas, but you can contribute in other ways, do it. There's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely. Totally agree.
Okay, so it is getting late, and I'm gonna have a field day editing this. I don't think everything's gonna make it.
This has been great.
Yeah,
I gotta go to bed.
Yeah. So any closing thoughts before I let you guys go?
My closing thoughts, I'll keep them nice and succinct. Never underestimate the power that you have in mobilizing your own personal human networks to accomplish real change through advocacy and through direct action.
Oh wow, you really did mean succinct, didn't you?
I love it.
I did. I said succinct.
Yeah.
I would be succinct.
Gotta give kudos to that.
I love it.
I think Gabby's last point is really what I want to write home about. Is just you don't need to be exactly the canvassing type of person. If you want to develop that skill or that's where you feel comfortable, then do it. But there are so many ways to be involved, even if it is something like collecting socks to help your community, right? There are so many little things. Well, I don't want to minimize Brian's work, but there are so many things you can do that feel manageable. And you can play up your strengths. You can be the social media person. So just stick to your strengths and know what they are. And you can make a lot of change without going completely out of your comfort zone.
Absolutely. I suppose just my closing thoughts would be don't beat yourself too much. Don't be that person who's like, oh, I should have knocked on more doors. I should have called more people. Oh, I'm just lying around doing nothing. Air quotes. Do what you can. You have a limit, respect it, and just be happy that you got some stuff done. You know what I mean? Like, don't fall into that trap of bashing yourself because you're not doing enough. Just know that everything you're doing is helping. So just keep that mindset, keep going forward, and just keep helping when you can. That's my closing.
Thanks again, guys, for coming on. It's been a blast to record this. Editing might be another story. Again, dear listener, that was Greenhouse Gaslighting. You know where to find our stuff in the doobly-doo. Follow us on social media. Definitely write to us about how we're doing. Thanks again for tuning in, listener. Take care.